Welcome, everyone. I call the June 5th Planning Commission meeting to order. The main purposes of tonight's meeting are study sessions on the lot frontage amendments and the 2024 Imagine Bothell Comprehensive Plan. Before we move on to the agenda items, I'd like to acknowledge our hybrid meeting format. The City of Bothell is providing the option to attend this meeting either in person or remotely via Zoom. For those participating via Zoom, the chat and question functions are not available for use to ensure compliance with the Open Public Meetings Act. We have a public comment agenda item at the beginning of the meeting. This time is for comments on issues not scheduled for hearing on tonight's agenda. Please limit those comments to 3 minutes. Please note that the City of Bothell does not tolerate verbal harassment. Please remember during these comments, if you have please remember this during your comments. If you have comments regarding our study session items, this would be the time to make those comments. Public comment will be allowed both in person and via Zoom. Those wishing to comment via Zoom were asked to submit an online form by 3 p.m. today. People wishing to submit written comments were also asked to submit those comments by 3 p.m. Email was encouraged as well and will be acknowledged. Those in attendance may also make comments and have been asked to indicate their desired comment on the sign-in sheets. The Imagine Bothell notice, city website, and tonight's agenda all provided information to the public for providing comments. And I don't believe we received any comments before 3, so nothing to read into the record. A video of this meeting will be streamed live as well as recorded and available for later viewing on the city's YouTube channel. A call-in number was provided on the meeting agenda for members of the public who wish to call in by phone to listen live to the meeting. For our phone-in callers, during staff presentations, staff will make every effort to specify which materials they are referencing so that everyone may follow along. At this point, we'll take a moment to acknowledge a few of the commissioners. Commissioner Jones, I see.
Here.
Commissioner Westerbeck.
Here.
Commissioner Lever.
Here.
Commissioner Robson. You're muted, but I see you waving. Commissioner Sills.
Here.
And Commissioner Gustafson.
Here.
In addition, Christian Gates, Deputy Community Development Director, and Boyd Benson, Utilities and Development Manager, are attending to present on the lot frontage agenda item. For the comp plan discussion, we're joined by Director Greenspan and several members from community development who Director Greenspan will introduce when the time comes. Lastly, before we begin, I'd like to reiterate some meeting guidelines. For all meeting attendees, please speak clearly and pause frequently. State your name each time before speaking. Mute your microphone when not speaking. And if you are streaming the live video feed, please turn off the sound as there is a delay. For commissioners, at specific breaks in the presentation, I will be calling on members who wish to speak or ask a question. If you want to speak, please indicate this by raising your hand, and I will call on people as I see them. Same with folks on Zoom. Raise your hand, and I'll make every attempt to see you, although sometimes I miss. So any of the commissioners attending can help me on that as well. I'd appreciate it. Identify yourself before you ask a question, make a motion, second a motion, or participate in debate. And please mute your microphone when not speaking. The first item on the agenda is public comment. The city has accepted visitor comment in writing as well as accepted sign-up sheets for those who wish to speak at tonight's meeting. Those speaking will have 3 minutes. Written comments submitted to staff no later than 3 p.m. were forwarded to all commissioners, and as I indicated, we did not see any. This time is for items not subject to hearing. So if you have anything to say on the study session items, this would be the time as well. So were there any comments? There's one online. So that was sent to us? Oh, in Zoom? Okay, if you want to let them in. Mr. Swanson, you're in. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. Welcome to the meeting.
Thank you. My name is Mark Swanson. I moved to Bothell in 1991. I bought a house on West Hill in 1994. And I'd like to say that I did send in an email today, and I got a response that The gal said she was busy, but I did send it in and I met the 3 o'clock deadline. So make sure that that's included in the minutes. I'd like to address something pretty limited today, and that's the tire dust issue. I included that information in the email. I don't know if you people were able to review it or not. I don't know where to start on this, but tire dust is killing our coho salmon. Our coho salmon are dying. They're dying all the time and in great numbers. An inner city bus going down Reeder Way puts out 100 to 200 times the tire wear particles as a single family occupancy vehicle. 100 to 200 times. It's even worse for the electrical vehicle hybrid buses because they weigh 72,000 pounds gross vehicle weight. They put out a lot of tire dust, and last time I checked, the buses don't carry 200 times to make up for this excessive tire dust. Now, in terms of the tire dust, electrical vehicles are, depending on which scientific study you look at, they're between 26% and 200 times produce more tire dust because of their excessive acceleration and their excessive weight than a single family, single occupancy vehicle gasoline car. That's the science. So, having said that, do we really want to go with electrical vehicles and bring buses down Northeast 185th? Is that really the right choice? Do we want to increase urban density based upon strong towns principles? The man only is a civil engineer. This urban densification has no merit in science. It's a ruse. So I'm watching my single family neighborhoods get destroyed up here on West Hill. And it's going to get even worse. And I don't want to see the BOPOP community hold secret meetings because that violates the OPMA. And as many of you know, and I don't know about Katie Sills, as many of you know, that BOPOP holds secret meetings and has held them for 4 years or 5. They meet in secret, in Bothell, in person, and while I don't have a list, I've got photographs that show there may have been violations of the OPMA.
You've got about 20 seconds, please wrap.
We're violating the GMA because we're not following the primacy of our comprehensive plan. We are filling our city with traffic, crime, and renters. Renters, which we've never had before.
Thank you.
That's
Your
not
3
right.
minutes are up.
Thank you.
All right. Were there any other comments? None? And none in the audience? All right. With that, we'll move on to the next item, which is approval of the May 15th minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes? This is an easy one. Commissioner Robson. Commissioner Robson seems to be having audio problems. Would someone else like to move to approve the minutes? Commissioner Lever moves approval. Is there a second? Commissioner Gustafson?
Seconded, please.
All right, it's been moved and seconded that we approve the minutes of the May 15th meeting. Is there any discussion around those minutes? Looking around and seeing none, all in favor of approval, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
And the minutes of the May 15th meeting are approved. With that, we'll move on to our study sessions. The first item is the lot frontage amendments. I'd like to invite staff up to lead us through this.
Good evening, Planning Commission. Boyd Benson, Utilities and Development Services Manager. Thanks for the time tonight. It's good to see you all. We last met May 1st, and we just discussed frontage improvements for small lot residential development. At that time, we went through a PowerPoint presentation. We had some suggested approaches with respect to frontage requirements. And since that time, we've drafted a draft Planning Commission finding conclusions and recommendations to summarize that information. We've also drafted the proposed code language and the ordinance, well, the code language that will be within the ordinance to revise the municipal code. And we'd like to bring that back to you for discussion. And if there's consensus among the Planning Commission, we'd like to move forward with the Planning Commission's finding conclusions and recommendations to the City Council. Before I get into the details of that, next steps on this, if you have consensus with Planning Commission tonight, is a meeting with City Council on June 25th, where we'll introduce the same topic in detail along with your findings and get Council's feedback on that. And if we have support with that or revisions, we'll take care of that, and then we'll come back to Council as quickly as possible. Our goal is to get this into effect as soon as possible so we can help support this type of development, housing type. So with that said, I'd like to just kind of go over the facts, findings, and conclusions real quickly, if that's okay. I did not prepare slides. We have them as a backup if needed, but I think it's pretty straightforward. We had consensus on each of the items that we had within the May 1st packet. And what we presented is a brief history, why we're doing this, location within the entire city, the proposed action, which is to make sure we have a good understanding of frontage requirements for ADUs and for housing types on single lot residential developments such as middle housing. It doesn't specifically address middle housing, but it does account for those type of units. With that said, the approach we brought forward on May 1st. What's summarized here is exactly what we presented on May 1st. You'll see that there was a revision, except for one item. You'll see there's a revision. At one point, we had provided a maximum 25% value improvements with respect to the development cost, and that was for basically 3 or 4 units. With legal review, we always look at proportionality and fairness, and setting that at 25% is neither proportional or fair. And I'd like to explain that real quick. And like I said, we can bring up a PowerPoint or something you'd like, but having that set at 25%, if you have a lot that has 50 feet of frontage and 4 units, 25% may be a pretty small number. It may be a large number with respect to the frontage improvements required. So we had some discussions, just ballpark discussions. Let's say it's $1,000 a linear foot. So someone in that respect may be subject to, let's say, $50,000 with improvements, which is most likely way below the 25%. If someone has 1,000 feet of frontage on their lot, that 25% maximum is a much larger number. And based on discussions with legal, we've come back and we are recommending that we just use our standard deviation approach, which we use right now for anything where the applicant can demonstrate that the impacts do not warrant full frontage or the rest. And I can't give you specific examples, so I'll just give you general ones. So what we see right now is if someone under current code, if they, let's say, redevelop a vacant lot, or codes as it sits now, not in the future hopefully, says you must do full frontage. If for some reason there's bike lane or undergrounding the rest, we can, if the applicant can say, look, I'm not adding more trips, I'm not adding or the trips I'm adding are not proportional to 1,000 feet of full frontage. That process with the deviation goes first to the staff to see if staff believes it's supportable, and then it goes to both the Public Works Director and the CD Director as well for these type of development ones. And it usually works pretty well. Our goal on those type of deviations is to come forward to management with consensus, and we typically get there. So, like I said, everything else is consistent with May 1st, except for that. We've taken out the 25% cap for anything above 2 units or 100% of gross floor area, and we replaced that with some additional language to kind of delineate the path forward with the deviation. Any questions about that?
Comments on that, Commissioners? Questions?
So it's incumbent upon the applicant to maybe get studies done to do that kind of, as we have done in the past, okay, to show that trip studies or through engineering or something like that.
It's a good question, Mr. Westbeck. On larger projects, there's always a consultant involved.
Sure. Yeah.
On smaller projects, it may be justification and documentation.
Okay.
So there's kind of a fine line. So
More than vibes, then,
yes, sir.
to use a kid's term. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But I mean, it's like I said, it'd be pretty apparent if you're adding a couple extra units and
Yeah.
let's say you had 5,000 linear feet of frontage, a mile of frontage. It's pretty apparent that full frontage on that would not
Yeah.
be proportional to the impact.
Right. So it might be, like you discussed at the last, 2 meetings ago, when this came up, a bit of a negotiation sort of to figure out what the city would find adequate, along with what the applicant could bear and keep the project alive. I don't know if that's something that is considered, but that's kind of what you're getting at.
We
that
do our best to
you're
make
not
sure
going to try and
that
burden the project too much.
We do our best to make sure that any improvements would mitigate the impact.
Yeah.
But it would be proportional
Okay.
to the impact as well. So let's say, I'm just making it up, let's say it
Sure.
was, let's say it was 5,000
Mhm.
feet. We'd make sure that any access points are graded out
Yeah.
to accommodate, future widening.
Yeah.
And right now with the current, let's say it was middle housing where you can get four
Sure.
units on a lot. Those aren't subject to our subdivision standards. So we take care of that. If it was to subdivide, we'd then come and say, I think you need to dedicate property because subdivision has different standards. But that's something
Right.
that we're still working on right now. We'd be, and Christian may chime in on this or Director Greenspan, but we'd probably be using our offspring subdivision or some other type of lot splitting type of
Okay.
approach. We'd want to make sure that if mitigate the impacts as possible, make sure it's proportional, but also set us up for success
Sure,
in the future.
yeah.
So someone's not installing an ADU.
Right, they're
in an area.
blindsided by, we're going to have to dedicate this now, and you got a building
Yeah,
there,
so
something like that.
we may not be able to require those things. In the past, we have,
Mm-hmm.
because we've had full frontage, demonstrate that all this is out and this
Sure.
and that, but we can promote that approach, because no one wants
Right.
to build a,
So it'd be a conversation like, you should know that, in 10 years, this may become BRT or something like that.
Yeah, or
We
if
don't
you-
know, but it could, so you should be aware of that when you're planning.
yeah,
kind of
or if
thing.
you choose to subdivide,
Yeah.
you may or may not be required to dedicate. And so please do make sure that or try your best to work to have your improvements outside of those areas, so you end up having a conforming lot with the
Got it.
appropriate setbacks and this or that, and not having a structure in an area that would be dedicated in the future.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other commissioners? So is there a space between requiring the full frontage improvements and nothing at all? For instance, if you got sidewalks on either side of the lot, maybe a asphalt, lower cost link between them?
That's kind of where we're going with that 25%. And once again, the good question, and I'm just going to share this, it's good, is where did that 25% came from? It didn't come from a study. It came from code that was old. So that's why we can't use that. But it really is more of a discussion. And the applicant, we help the applicant through the process
Sure.
to say what might be reasonable. And there's interaction there. But it really is the applicant saying, once again, a mile of improvements. We don't think that's proportional. We think that we can mitigate trips by putting an asphalt path or do this with respect to pedestrians. And then it gets even more complicated because, once again, if that goes to subdivision, it's has to comply with safe routes to school and all the rest of those. So we really want to be upfront to understand what type of improvements might have to occur, whether it's, you know, going to be subdivided or not, so that they're aware. Did I answer your question? So there's no, we can't really say exactly what the middle ground is. I'm not going to say it's a gray area, but it's site by site to help understand what's proportional and have the applicant demonstrate why it is, and then have that discussion with the city to document it.
But I think I heard you say there could well be a middle ground. It's not all or nothing.
Most definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because
And-
yeah.
And again, I heard you say, when completed, they'll have to accommodate the future frontage improvements when the time comes. You don't want to be moving a house or tearing down a structure.
Yeah, and that's something we can't actually, with the new duplex requirements and the rest, if they're not subdividing, we can't require that. But we can strongly suggest it because a lot of these could be subdivided in the future.
Yes.
So we'll do our best to help, what is it, forewarned is forearmed, the applicants so that they don't come back a year later and try to subdivide and we say, sorry, you're not meeting setbacks or this or that. So I think it'll work out pretty well. With ADUs, I'm not as concerned because typically they're smaller structures. I think it's going to be more, I want to plop another, I want to add another dwelling unit and go from there. Christian, anything to add to that?
No, I think it's very much case by case, and yeah, like Boyd was saying, ADU's probably not a concern given where they're typically located, especially when it comes to future right-of-way dedication.
But part of your conversation might be that it could be in the applicant's interest to accommodate that future change because it would give them more options in the future as opposed to foreclosing options.
Most definitely. Yeah, and we'd definitely be checking grades and the rest because
Yes.
our greatest concern is someone puts in a driveway and it's a steep slope. And then with the understanding that road will be widened, and now when that driveway shortened, it's much steeper and they can't access their home as easily. And so, yeah, we're pretty heads up on that to make,
Yeah.
try to take care of issues before they arise.
Thanks. Other commissioner comments or discussions? All right, you want to proceed walking through?
Yeah, thank you so much. That was good discussion. And then we just discussed the public meetings, the public noticing that occurred for this, the deliberations and specific findings. So once again, this is draft language. We'd really like to understand if we could go bullet by bullet again if you wish. We'd like to understand if this captures the conclusions from Planning Commission, because if so, we can move this forward to council. So, Chair, would you be open to going item by item again very quickly, or no? What would you like to see?
Yeah, let's go quickly, in particular because we have two new commissioners who haven't been through this process before. And I'll just say this is a way for the commission to speak directly to the council. This talks about what's important to us, particularly, some of the elements are boilerplate, consistency with the plan and other things, but there are elements here that should reflect the thoughts of the commission, and in the past, we have made changes to proposals to reflect that. So please go ahead, and where it is boilerplate, you can just say that.
Yeah, for sure. And we did have comments last time, and I took notes, and so some of these kind of address those comments. So the findings, the first one is they're consistent with House Bill 1337, and they are. And CD's checked that as well. The second one is code amendments are consistent with reducing barriers and promoting affordability for middle housing. Once again, these specifically don't address middle housing, but they do so by limiting frontage improvements. Can I just go until there's an exception? Yeah. Someone says, okay. The third one is they're consistent with reducing barriers. Again, it's just a different way of saying it. One is with House Bill 1110, one is with municipal code. And then the next one is, it's consistent with the adopted comprehensive plan with land use goal 6 to accommodate the population growth, to ensure adequate choice of attractive living accommodations, to encourage development of accessory dwelling units, and to promote appropriate supply and mix of densities and housing types. So we believe those all are correctly stated. The fifth is this will require Department of Commerce review. So once we get, we've already drafted SEPA and the rest, we'll submit that, and it'll require non-project SEPA review. That's already been, the checklist's been drafted and the DNS has been drafted. Yep. And that'll have to be completed before adoption by City Council. And that's what we have. So those are the specific findings. Are there any exceptions or corrections or revisions or additions to those that you would like to see?
Don't see any commissioner wishing to comment thus far, so please proceed.
Okay, great. And then we have the exhibits. We have a staff briefing went to City Council. We have the expanded briefing that went to you folks on May 1st. And then we have the proposed codes language that we discussed. We can go line by line on that if you wish. Otherwise, we can skip that part. You can say that in a second. Public testimony. Yeah, we discussed that. And I'm not sure, we might need to add, and Christian, would we be adding the testimony that we received today? It wasn't really specifically about this item. It was more concerned about brake dust, so.
Right, it wasn't necessarily about the frontage.
Cool.
He did indicate he sent an email, so you might look at that before,
We can review that.
yeah.
Cool.
Before making a final decision on that.
All right, so we'll do that before this is finalized, and then the conclusions, the recommended code amendments have been drafted and noticed. The recommended code amendments in Exhibit C are necessary to promote construction of and lower barriers to relatively affordable housing, and the recommended comprehensive plan and code amendments are best interest of public health, safety, and welfare. And then the conclusion is just the recommendation that Planning Commission recommends this action.
So is there any discussion or any questions around these findings, conclusions, and recommendations?
I have a question.
Yeah, yes, Commissioner Lever. No, it'll turn red when you're on.
I don't know why it's not working. So, I have a question more around like the implementation. I know last time we met, I was asking questions about how do we know whether the intent of the policy will have the impact that we're hoping to have. And I believe there's going to be changes to their systems where we track even like middle housing and all of that. And I was just wondering if we will have a sense of how we'll be tracking these type of permits and whether or not we see an increase or decrease on the type of changes that are made as a result of the new code.
It's a very good question. And so as part of the comprehensive process we're doing now, there is reporting. I think it's on a 5-year basis. And we'll be reporting similar information. And so it's a goal of development services to make sure we have a good understanding and track that type of use so we understand how it's being employed and what it means with respect to growth in the city and utilities and the rest. So it'll be tracked. It won't be something that's tracked annually, but it'll be something that'll be looked at over time. And then for the process itself that we're discussing now, I mentioned last time, we don't know how this is all going to occur. It's relatively new state legislation. So we'll be looking at this in the next couple of years. And if we see something that comes up, let's say that this code is not doing what it needs to do, we'll definitely bring it back because our goal is to make this as simple as possible. So we'll definitely track housing and these type of units and who takes advantage of this. But you may not see that officially reported out until we do our comprehensive plan reporting. Unless Christian here, okay.
Any other questions or comments from commissioners? Seeing none, is there a motion to adopt the findings, conclusions, and recommendations around the single lot residential development frontage requirements code amendments?
It's Commissioner John's motion.
I heard Commissioner Jones make a motion to approve. Yes. Is there a second?
I second the motion.
Commissioner Westerbeck is seconded. Any further discussion around this item? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. With that, you've got commission approval. We can,
Thank you so much for the good discussion and your time. It's greatly appreciated. Good evening.
okay. So with that, we will move on to our next study session item, the 2024 Imagine Bothell Comprehensive Plan discussion. And I believe Director Greenspan will
Yes.
start.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Going to let the now expanded planning staff take the table tonight. And I realize as I'm speaking this evening, we are heading into the second half of 2024, which means that we're starting to head into the home stretch for updating our comprehensive plan. And that is the first periodic update that we've done since 2015. We need to have our comprehensive plan update adopted by the end of this year. We did release a draft of the comprehensive plan on April 17th, as well as a draft environmental impact statement. And even though we did that just about a month and a half ago, the planning process has been ongoing since early 2023 and extended into 2024 as well. I'm sure many of you recall our former project manager, Kirsten Mant. She came to this commission many times to get feedback, particularly on guiding principles throughout last year and the beginning of this year on each element. So tonight, we wanted to just take a moment and circle back with the Planning Commission on some of those fundamental elements, especially for new members that really weren't part of this process. You might have attended some of our community engagement events. We've considered community engagement a priority for plan development. We had 3 pretty well-attended open houses over the past 6 months to 8 months, and we've also attended a variety of other community events where we met the community where they're at. So we made that input easier and more convenient for them. Bothell is a growing community. As a matter of fact, we just learned this past week that we have officially cracked the 50,000 population mark, which is pretty significant. And by 2044, which is our horizon year for the comprehensive plan, we're planning for over 18,000 new jobs and over 12,000 new housing units. We have an obligation as a city, especially based on some legislation that was passed in 2022, to plan for all economic segments of our population. Roughly 75% of our future housing needs of that 12,000 or in excess of 12,000 units are for households that are going to be earning less than 80% of area median income. So we need to plan for a variety of housing types, but especially for multifamily units that are both attainable and affordable to all. So tonight, our Deputy Director, Christian Guest, is here, along with our consultant team and long-range planning staff, to get everybody up to speed in this long planning process, which we're starting to come towards the end of. So in addition to Christian, Jesse Hartman from Burke Consulting is here, and she's going to discuss growth targets and some of the land use alternatives that we've proposed in the plan, as well as our draft environmental impact statement. Jacqueline Sampson, Cameron Colvin, and Emily Nielsen are here from the department, and they'll be presenting a high-level review of each element that we've included. And then we'll conclude with next steps, knowing that by the end of this year, we're going to need to have an adopted update to the comprehensive plan, and we're going to ask the Planning Commission over the next month or so to mull over the alternatives that have been included so we can get direction from you and you can provide your feedback to City Council before they break in August. With that, Christian, feel free to take it away.
Great. So, tonight, no action required. As Jason said, we are going to provide the overview, bring everybody up to speed, kind of reset that level of understanding for where we are. Where we are now is phase 3 of this update process. We've discussed how we've gone through all the other element conversations, existing conditions, and we've gone through the draft EIS, and we're with the draft plan now that we are looking for the input from Planning Commission to then take the next step to get to council. Then we'll move on, as you can see here, into the final steps before the end of this year. As mentioned, we're gonna run through quickly an engagement, kind of a review of the comp plan, public engagement, and then the summary of the elements with upcoming, and kicking that off with what is a comp plan. So for the benefit of new members as well as the community that is hopefully watching, listening, or checking in later on, it's our overarching vision and policy framework for the city that we use that guides us on a daily basis. So what we do with this comp plan will inform the municipal code, budget, how we build, how the public and private build development, and how we're moving forward into the future. We're following the standard framework in this vertical progression from the Growth Management Act and the multi-county planning policies and the county planning policies, taking those into consideration for what we have to do. Those are those targets that we're working to accommodate. Elements we'll touch on as far as what we've added this year to comply with the state standards. That'll educate how we move forward with our upcoming zoning regulations, and which will result in new projects. So the general areas of focus, obviously meeting the GMA requirements, some of the new elements this year, adding an implementation element, adding a climate element, incorporating diversity, equity, and inclusion. We worked closely with communications and Gabby and others to make sure that we've pulled that lens into the framework and how the text and approach was drafted or has been drafted. As always, a robust and inclusive engagement and visioning process, looking for solid outreach and inclusion of as many people in the community as we can get. And we'll touch on that briefly here. So community engagement, not only through focus groups and committees, that all of this has happened before half the people in this room arrived, through all the hard work of Jason, Jesse, others. We've been going through the outreach process through the Engage Bothell platform, which is our platform online where comments have been submitted, surveys have been provided, and we've also engaged through public events like the Summer Nights, Sustainamania, tagging onto those events that the city puts on, making sure that we're taking advantage of every opportunity to communicate with those that may not know what a comprehensive plan is, and educate them and get them thinking about it, getting their input as we go. And then moving on to open houses, just wrapped up the last 2 of 3 that we've had with solid attendance throughout all of them, and really looked to continue that initial outreach through these events to make sure we're getting to as many corners of the city as possible as we move forward. We've received several public comments throughout. The formal public comment period ran, as you can see, from April 17th to May 17th. We've taken in comments in every way, shape, and form, and we've summarized those briefly in the staff report, and included all the comments within there that we have officially received. what we've generally heard, and just a quick summary, from the comments, alternative 3 seemed to be the preferred alternative that we were hearing the most about, with still some questions from most of those contributors. Definitely a need for and a recognition that infrastructure and services need to be supportive of what the changes will be over the next couple decades, including multimodal transit options, public open spaces, such as parks and trail networks. Some suggested enhancing policy goals and language to further protect the natural and cultural resources, and then a full detailed response will be coming within our next couple weeks, prior to the public hearing, so that you can have a summary of all those comments that we've received, as well as what we hope to hear from the community on the 26th. We're going to now move into each of the elements. Jesse with Burke is going to touch on land use and housing, kind of the bulk of the discussion likely tonight. That's where we've heard the most comments, we received the most questions. And then we'll move in through the other elements with Cameron, Jacqueline, and Emily. And then I'll wrap up with kind of next steps. And we'll pause along the way after or along, especially with the detailed information from Jesse, and within the group of Cameron, Jacqueline, and Emily. So please let us know if you've got questions along the way. We want to make sure we're getting you what you need to be clear on these items.
Jesse Hartman with Burke Consulting. Thank you so much for your time. It's nice to see you all again. It's been a while for me. I've managed 2 laptops here, so okay. Yeah. So I'm going to kick us off with land use element because it's kind of central to all the other elements of the plan. It essentially describes how land should be used in the city, which then guides growth and investment over the next 20 years. The kind of direction is encapsulated in the future land use map, which is proposed here in Alts 2 and 3, and then the accompanying future land use designations that go along with that. The future land use designations indicate the general types and intensities of allowed uses in areas, but they are intentionally broader than the zoning regulations that actually implement those land use designations. So one of the requirements for the periodic update is to plan for your fair share of growth. Jason was mentioning these numbers a minute ago with the adopted targets for housing and jobs citywide. Because you have the wonderful, unique distinction of being one of the few communities in Washington State that spans 2 counties, we plan to targets set by both of the counties, as well as kind of looking at your citywide numbers. So Bothel's adopted targets are for 12,782 new housing units and 18,205 jobs citywide from 2020 to 2024. And then there's specific housing targets by income level and for emergency housing in each county, which is what's shown here in this table. And we looked at essentially 3 alternative kind of land use scenarios for the plan relative to these targets and the city's objectives that Christian was mentioning. It's the no action alternative and 2 action alternatives. So I'm going to kind of go over the no action one very briefly. It's essentially a continuation of your existing plan. It includes no policy or land use changes, and it would not adopt a separate future land use map because your current future land use and zoning map are essentially a one-to-one relationship right now. So this future land use map shown here was created only so we could compare to the other alternatives in a meaningful way. But it essentially just aggregates up to the land use designations but it's consistent with the existing underlying zoning, clearly designates parks and public uses, and there's no kind of proposed land use or zoning changes. The alternative is required for study under the State Environmental Policy Act, but it isn't a viable path forward for the city for many reasons, but it doesn't have enough housing capacity at certain income bands, and it would be out of compliance with some of the other GMA requirements. So the action alternatives is where we're going to spend most of our time, and it's essentially two different ways to accommodate growth in the city over the next 20 years. I'm going to run through things that are consistent between the two of them first before we get to the kind of major differences, which is starting with this future land use map shown here. Under either of the alternatives, the city would adopt a future land use map, which would be separate from the zoning map. Administratively, that also means that individual rezones would no longer require a comp plan amendment unless they're drastically different from the intended land use intensity for that area. So as long as the zone is kind of within the same set of implementing zones for the land use designation, it wouldn't require a comp plan amendment. The proposed future land use map is the same under both of the alternatives, as are kind of the purpose and principal uses of the land use designations. And in general, allowed densities on both of these alternatives would increase throughout the residential areas, consistent with the middle housing and ADU revisions you adopted in March. Just pausing there to recognize that when we were crafting the alternatives, you had not adopted these changes. So the no action doesn't necessarily include all of those, but that we are reflecting those in the action alternatives, and you have adopted them. So that would continue to apply under either of these. And those kind of increases are all the yellow and orange areas on this map, which are the kind of residential low and residential medium. You would see the density increases in those areas. Both action alternatives also redesignate some specific areas, specific residential areas where services are anticipated from residential low to residential medium. I'll cover kind of those specific areas in a little bit more detail in a minute, but essentially it's kind of central Bothell in the Maywood-Beckstrom Hill neighborhood along either side of 104th, where transit's expected to improve over the 20-year period. And then kind of west of downtown in West Hill and west of Red Barn, which is the kind of top left circle there. TBD on the name for that sub-area still, but we have been referring to it as Red Barn, so that's what I'm going to use here just for ease of reference. And then the lowest density residential designations in the city, this residential conservation, are really just limited to areas with specific environmental constraints. So it includes portions of the city that are encumbered by critical areas like wetlands or steep slopes, or with significant ecological functions for North Creek or Sammamish River. But those are intentionally pretty limited within the city. And then finally, both of these alternatives assumed that kind of overall growth would be consistent with the targets, and that both citywide and by county. So that means that even if the alternative creates more capacity based on the zoning revisions, we looked at growth that would not exceed the targets that are set for the city. The other piece that feeds into that is regionally planning for future activity units in the Canyon Park Regional Growth Center up in the north there and in downtown. Activity units are a measure of total activity, so it's population and jobs. PSRC has a target of 45 activity units per an acre, future activity units per an acre for Canyon Park, which is also adopted in the city's sub-area plan. And then downtown has a target to be a countywide growth center with King County. The future activity unit target would need to be 30 activity units per an acre. That is not technically adopted in your downtown sub-area plan, but it is pretty consistent with the densities and intensity of use that are in that plan. So we used those as kind of control points within looking at growth for under the alternatives. So I'm going to pause here real quick before I get into any of the differences, if there's any questions so far.
Commissioners, questions, comments? I got a question that's just kind of
Yep.
popped into my mind. How do if at all, do the student housing units at the university come into play? A couple of new, good-sized units there. Are they?
Yeah, I would have to look back at exactly how we looked at what pipeline units were considered. I know we looked at like major developments that were in process and thinking about capacity. Student housing is something, student and staff housing for UW and Cascadia are something that we've kind of considered in the update, especially in policy language as well in the housing element. So I'd have to get back to you on the specific details of where it was in there, but I know we did talk about it and consider it in the update.
Yeah, I can see them being treated differently because they're for students, not the general population. But
Yeah, and it's not really part of the, it is,
but people live there.
yeah, it's definitely different than the kind of the targets that are set
Yeah.
citywide, so.
Okay. Just occurred to me looking at the purple there in the circle.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions before I?
I am not seeing any other commissioners
Okay.
seeking, so please proceed. Thanks.
Okay, so since they have the same land use map, the primary difference between these two alternatives is kind of where and how they allow increased residential densities. As I mentioned before, the land use map is the same, but they vary the type, pattern, and density of development in the underlying zoning to meet the targets in different ways, which would also likely change the distribution of not only just housing, but also job growth in the city. So the alternative 2, which is the neighborhoods alternative, allows more housing types and increased density throughout the residential areas. These go beyond what's required by HB 1110 and 1337 and what you adopted in March. The residential low areas, which are the yellow, generally allow up to 2 units per lot, and they would allow up to 4 units per lot with an average minimum lot size of 5,000 square feet under this alternative. The residential medium, so the orange areas, they currently allow 2 to 4 units per lot, depending on the location and kind of whether or not some of those units are affordable. But those would allow up to 8 units per lot with an average minimum lot size of 2,000 square feet. And I just want to pause to recognize that these numbers are developed to hit the targets kind of in a spreadsheet exercise for at this stage. The actual revisions in kind of your final alternative could look different, and they could also use some other measures to kind of get similar bulk, scale, and intensity of development. So these are what we've kind of been looking at for now, but we may end up somewhere that differs a little bit from that. It also doesn't mean that all new development in those residential areas would be that dense. It's just that this type of development and scale intensity would be allowed. There'd also be some very modest increases to height and kind of target floor area ratios in the mixed use designations, but those would be much less than under the other alternative. So citywide, you'd essentially see more and denser residential growth, likely spread throughout all the residential areas, which would include more ADUs, middle housing like townhomes in the residential low areas, and the residential medium, as well as some smaller multifamily housing in the residential medium areas. It also means that because you've got more housing growth throughout the residential areas, you would probably get less of it within the centers, given the targets. So you might see a greater balance of a greater proportion of jobs in the centers than you would under the other alternative, especially in Snohomish County with Canyon Park. And then you'd see some pretty limited, likely see some limited growth in the Snohomish County portion of the Red Barn sub-area, which is important because the city is considering countywide growth center designation for that area with Snohomish County. And so you have to kind of look at that portion of the sub-area a little bit differently. So the center's alternative in comparison, which is Alt 3, focuses the additional capacity in the existing centers and along major transportation corridors. So we're talking about downtown, Canyon Park, North Creek, and Red Barn. The typical heights, max heights, and target floor area ratios would increase throughout most of the commercial, employment, and mixed-use areas. There'd be no change to average minimum lot sizes in the residential low or medium areas, but both would allow up to 4 units per lot. So it's a little bit more in the residential low than currently allowed. Citywide, your residential growth would likely include more multifamily housing in the centers, more kind of moderate density middle housing like townhomes in the residential medium, and mostly detached kind of single unit housing in the residential low areas with some limited ADUs and middle housing there as well. Conversely to the last one, less housing growth in the residential low and medium areas means you probably see more of it in the centers. So there'd be a better, the housing to jobs would be a little bit more balanced within those centers. And then this alternative also expects the most growth in that Snohomish County portion of Red Barn if the city were to go after countywide growth center designation with Snohomish County. So looking specifically at, I'm going to kind of jump back to the areas of change, which are these targeted or specific areas that we would be redesignating from low to medium. Most of those changes are from low to medium. There are some other kind of small ones in there. But these are generally where services are expected. The next few slides are going to kind of focus on what those changes could mean. The other small areas of change up by 228th and Meridian, it's hard to see from where I am, but my eyesight is terrible. So there's some residential low going to mixed use neighborhood, which is up kind of to, I gotta think I never eat soggy waffles, the northwest of the city there. And then there's also some parcels going from residential low to downtown transition on this map. But those were already redesignated and rezoned in December. Again, just when we made the alternatives, they were not that way. And then there's a few others kind of, there's another small one down by Brickyard where it'd be going from mixed use neighborhood to employment. All right. So both of the alternatives would recognize the middle housing development in the residential medium areas that you adopted in March with higher densities assumed under Alt 2 than 3. These areas would allow some kind of small, like I said, small scale multifamily under Alt 2, so which is kind of generally on the right side of this middle housing diagram, so more of the kind of multiplex level of development. And then the versus Alt 3, which has kind of more of the middle portion of this middle diagram, so townhouse kind of density level. The table here gets into a little bit more detail. So kind of the implementing zones that go along, we've got implementing zones that go along with residential low and medium, the average minimum lot sizes, maximum units per lot, and expected gross densities of new development under each alternative. The for residential low, the implementing zones are generally the kind of R7200 to 9600. You can see the average minimum lot sizes have a range currently, which is what that Alt 1 no action, they would stay what they currently are. So 5,400 to 8,400 square feet, part of what you adopted in March to revise those. Under Alt 2, they go to 5,000, and under Alt 3, they would stay as they are. You'd see the max units per lot increase to 4 under both of the alternatives. And the estimated gross densities would increase under both of the alternatives a bit, but they would definitely increase more under Alt 2. So going from about 4 to 6 units per acre to 8 to 16 under Alt 2 and 4 to 12 under Alt 3. It's, again, important to note that these gross densities are estimates for new development. They're kind of based on our more general assumptions for the draft alternatives, but they do consider average minimum lot size and units per lot. They also include a deduction factor for kind of estimated row and other requirements since they're gross figures. So the actual densities of new development might be a little bit different than what's shown there. Again, they're also the expected gross densities of just new development, so the neighborhoods themselves would intensify over time, but would not all be redeveloped at those densities. With the residential medium, we've got implementing zones are the R 2800 to 5400, both the attached and detached. The average minimum lot sizes would go from 2,800 to 5,400 square feet under Alt 1 or 3 to 2,000 under Alt 2. And you'd see the units, max units per lot increase. They're somewhere between 2 and 4, depending on kind of where you are in relation to transit and whether affordable housing is included. But those would go to 8 under Alt 2, 3 under Alt, 4 under Alt 3. And your kind of estimated gross densities, again, would increase under both of them, with the bigger increase under Alt 2 to 20 to 30 units versus kind of 15 to 20 units per acre under Alt 3. The final kind of future land use and zoning recommendations would ensure a smooth transition between the densities. So if there's kind of, see some gaps between kind of like for instance, under Alt 3, it shows 4 to 12 under residential low and 15 to 20 under residential medium. The final revisions would kind of get you a clearer range that doesn't have a little funny gap there between 12 and 15. So for those areas specifically that are going from low to medium, what that means is they would be essentially rezoned under either of the alternatives to something in one of the implementing zones under residential medium. Those areas which currently new development is kind of primarily detached housing, some duplexes and ADUs, or kind of really low scale middle housing, you'd be providing more opportunities for medium density residential development, which would include kind of multi-dwelling and middle housing development, like we talked about before. And the lot sizes, the average minimum lot sizes would be decreasing in those areas under either of the alternatives, as would the max units per lot would go up, and you'd see the densities, this estimated gross densities go up as well. Some kind of examples of what that can look like for kind of smaller scale multifamily under Alt 2. Again, it's important to remember these are just examples, and that other development regulations around critical areas, setbacks, landscaping would continue to apply. I recognize that the image in the middle is probably familiar to you, and it is in Bothell. But we've included it here because I believe my colleague said it was 2,900 square foot lot. 20, thank you for correcting. Yes, I knew I was going to get a correction, and it's got. No, please. So it's a smaller lot with, and I think it's got 5 units on it. 4. Thank you. So it's kind of a type of development that could happen in those residential medium areas under Alt 2. The city's other kind of development regulations around critical areas, setbacks, landscaping, those would all continue to apply. And so it's not that 100% of every lot in residential medium would be developed at those densities. Some samples of what it could look like under Alt 3. You're seeing things that are more like townhomes here. Similar scale type of middle housing is what we would expect in those areas under Alt 3. And then just to note the area, yep, I'm on the same one. Okay. Area proposed to change from residential low to mixed use neighborhood. That's up by 228th Meridian. The mixed use neighborhood essentially would would allow maximum heights of 4 to 5 stories, target floor area ratios of 2.5 to 3, depending on whether it's all 2 or 3. But the focus would shift here from just kind of lower density residential to a mixed use development that is at the neighborhood scale. So some supporting neighborhood businesses and services. You could see some some denser housing to go along with that, but definitely the focus on a neighborhood scale mixed use there to support the surrounding neighborhood. So I'm gonna pause here again. That's kind of the conclusion of what I have prepared for land use, but before I switch over to housing, and I'm sure there are questions, so.
So Commissioners, Commissioner Lever?
Yes, I have a question around the studies that were made to really kind of make the recommendations about the change of the zoning, particularly for the blocks that are within cul-de-sacs or adjacent to like green spaces. I think you potentially answered my question that there are other zoning regulations that will be taken under consideration when a redevelopment does happen that may really look at the capacity of a block, right? I'm thinking of if you have a cul-de-sac and you have 4 single-family homes, and then all of a sudden you have like 4 multi-unit residential, that it really will change the use of the street and everything. And if it's adjacent to the green space, can you help me understand how each block was kind of analyzed to see whether or not it could really sustain more density at a block by block level?
Yeah, the major piece that we looked at was kind of where are they in relation to existing and planned transit is a big one there. And then also most of those kind of areas going from low to medium, I think is what you're specifically getting at, are kind of around or kind of surrounded by all of the existing centers in the city already. And so it's you've got to add capacity somewhere. And so we're looking at the areas that make the most sense. Each individual parcel has all of its kind of unique characteristics you've got to work around. So if there are critical areas, there would still be setbacks, kind of frontage requirements, all that kind of stuff still applies. And so it depends on each individual parcel. We didn't necessarily, we did look kind of at the redevelopment potential of parcels, but we are speaking to it kind of more at the higher level here, where we're looking at not trying to pinpoint and say like where redevelopment specifically is expected. Does that answer your question?
It does, and I do have a question around engagement that kind of goes to this question, because when it comes to the engagement, and I was kind of almost maybe wondering like what were the expectations for response rates around people providing their feedback, because when the plan does get approved, and then oftentimes, and then it's at a neighborhood level, and there's all these myths that start kind of flowing around, and then if someone, I want to make sure that I understand that at a block by block level, there will always be that comprehensive review of what's happening at that particular parcel, and it's not a blanket statement and all of a sudden then you have all the neighbors complaining that we just had a call about someone concerned with renters and or the increase of density. And I want to make sure that I really understand how the city and the zoning and all our processes will allow for understanding what is needed at a block by block level.
Yeah.
Even though there was a blanket change of zoning.
Yeah, and so we haven't gotten to the point where we've made like the specific zoning change recommendation for the parcels in those areas. We're still at kind of the land use designation level, so which is a little bit higher. Rezones we're going to get into a little bit more of the granularity with kind of the next step of this process when we look at like where rezones would need to happen to create the capacity. The other piece of that is that any new development is still going to have to go through the city's process to get permits. All the other regulations still apply. So you are still going to have to meet other requirements that help specifically looking at things like land use compatibility and protection for the natural environment and all of the other things that you have built into your code to help with that.
Thank you, that is helpful. And I realize I didn't ask my question about engagement. So when it comes to engagement, did we reach the goal expected around like engagement or participation from community? Like thinking, knowing that engagement typically is not as high as
Yeah.
we would like to see it, unless, then it gets approved and then we hear it. How did we really do around the engagement component?
Yeah. So the engagement has been kind of on a number of levels, I would say, from like for the open houses, I think we had pretty good participation for a city this size. That is my kind of anecdotal, professional experience, working with other communities in the area. People seem engaged, and we had good numbers of turnout. I know that we've done some specific engagement for the Red Barn sub area as well, and had good response there. It's hard. I would love to always see more engagement, and I think for the size of the community, we've had a pretty good turnout from the public.
I would sort of amplify that in that when we had our open house last fall, we had, I think, over 150 attendees at that event. And that was really just sort of laying the foundation for what a comprehensive plan is. And we also launched the Engage Bothell platform online that would allow some exercises to take place. And so we've kind of, for lack of a better term, planted the seeds for engagement from last fall, hoping that those that really wanted to stay engaged we'd have those platforms to let that happen. So we've had more open houses. The Engage Bothell platform has continued. We didn't, I think, have a specific target to say X percentage of the community should comment, participate, and it's hard for us to know whether people feel that they're either satisfied or not satisfied with the draft if they don't actually comment. So I think that's why we're going to have the public hearing on the 26th coming up. And you also have as part of your packet this evening a lot of formal comments that we received. But I think generally speaking, I would agree with Jesse. We've gotten pretty good feedback for a topic like this, which has community impacts, but it's also not about a particular site-specific project. And it's hard for people sometimes to wrap their heads around that.
Commissioner Sills and then Commissioner Robson.
Thank you. My question is, are the proposed zoning changes under alternatives 2 and 3, do those apply to HOAs within Bothell as well?
I don't have an answer for that right now. I don't think we have that level of detail yet.
Okay, I would be curious about that, and I would also be curious how much of Bothell is, our HOAs encompassing, just so we get an idea of how that might impact some of this.
Mm-hmm. Just make a note of that so I don't forget.
Okay, Commissioner Robson.
See if I can get this going right. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Fantastic. Yay. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. I know you guys have been working so hard on it, and it's been such a big project. First of all, I'd really like to thank you for these super handy comparative slides. Would it be possible for us to get these slides so that as we're mulling over the alternatives, we have these super handy charts?
Yes, we will post this likely tomorrow morning with the packet as an addition to the packet.
Phenomenal. Thank you for that. As you know, we've been hearing a lot from the community about engagement. And I was wondering what specific steps you've done to reach out to people who maybe don't have access to computers or are not real mobile to attend community events, maybe have English as a second language, maybe are elderly, mentally ill, have those kinds of disabilities, or immigrant population. Have you taken specific steps to address those marginalized groups?
Yeah, I'm going to speak to this a little bit, and then Jason, I don't know if you want to add anything, but We did kind of initially, we did some outreach, we did some interviews with groups that the city helped us identify, and that others kind of pointed us to. We also have kind of had some more focus group type discussions where representatives from various groups were with us. I'm trying to remember. I did not do the Red Barn focus group, so I need to look back and see who was involved with that, but I know we had good turnout for it. We have made efforts to kind of directly reach out to people, and then I know with like it not just online, and then I know with the like the climate element, for example, I believe the city went to I can't remember which school, but we went to a school and talked to students about it. So we've tried to have these conversations with people where they're at. Jason, I don't know if you have anything else.
Yeah, I would also mention that we do have a working group that has community-based organizations and non-governmental organizations that serve as envoys for us. And often they have stakeholders that may not feel comfortable either coming to a meeting or talking to us directly. And so we did have that working group to help them be our envoys to the community. And it's hard to know how many people they reached directly, but I know that they certainly helped us when we were trying to identify some of the barriers towards our housing goals and achieving housing goals and equitable goals. So I think that's pretty much characterizes the efforts that we've made. We've also always made sure that if anybody requests translation services, we make that available.
Okay. Thank you for that. I'd be really interested in knowing a little bit more. I remember seeing the applications for that steering committee. I'd love to know where can I find that information on who's on it and who they represent?
There is a kind of public engagement summary to date as part of the draft comp plan that went out. So I think it's Appendix A.
Oh, okay.
I'd have to check to see if the names of the folks on that steering committee are in there or not. But if not, I think the city staff can get that to you. I know we have it.
Yeah. Of course. Yeah. That would be super interesting. I would love to know just kind of what corners we're reaching out to. So, yeah, that would be really fascinating. Thank you for pointing me in that direction. Oh my gosh, I can't read my writing. Hang on 1 second. Can we get the slides? Oh, wasn't preferred. Okay, well, why don't we go to someone else? Thank you so much for your answers. And if I have further questions, raise my hand.
Commissioner Westerbeck?
Thank you. I'll echo Commissioner Robson's comments. This has been a huge amount of work, and I'm just amazed at what you guys have put together the last couple of years. It's been, I can hardly read it all, let alone you guys writing and processing and everything. I wanted to make comments more than questions in this case, because I've been thinking a lot about some of this for sure. We've heard a lot from as long as I've been on Planning Commission, I've heard a lot about people being concerned about all the growth downtown. Now, I'm comfortable with that because it's serving a purpose and we desperately need housing numbers. But it's also not creating a lot of home ownership opportunities. Alternative 2, I think, would create a vastly more opportunities for the people who want to provide the more naturally occurring middle housing, home ownership, equity building opportunities, particularly on smaller lot sizes or in triplex, fourplex, townhouses, et cetera, et cetera. So I feel pretty strongly, I think alternative 2 is the stronger alternative versus trying to push everything into downtown. Because we certainly have a number of letters, people writing about how much they prefer alternative 3, but it seemed like it was very heavily weighted towards folks who already had homes. and they really didn't want any change in their neighborhood, and I totally understand that. I can identify with that. But I think there are a lot of people who aren't writing letters and that I just talk to in my everyday life, and we've heard through the years come to planning commission meetings or just talk to out on the streets who lament that they don't have time to come to meetings or they can't make comments, but they would very much like to stay in Bothell, but they can't afford a $950,000 home. So alternative 2 seems like the strong one to me, because we're going to still see a lot of growth downtown, and it might be time for us to open up the downtown sub-area plan too. That might be coming, it sounds like, to buff that up so we would kind of get the best of both worlds, kind of get some alternative three things in there, items in there, but also get the alternative 2 to spread everything out across the city. So I just feel like that's a huge one I hear over and over again. Like, well, rentals are great downtown, but I don't want to start a family or whatever and get a 2 or 3 bedroom out, someplace beyond downtown. They might even want to be downtown, but that's not going to be accommodated. So maybe they'll have to be out in the edges of Bothell where people and small developers, much like myself, when I started doing that work, could build something and they didn't have to be an expert. And then along with that goes, I'm really happy to see the smaller lot sizes. It's great. But I think of examples like in Houston, they made smaller lot sizes, 15 or 20 years ago now. And love or hate what's happened in Houston, they've had a lot of housing built because they've went to, I think, a 2,400 or 2,000 square foot lot size. And so they're building these tall, like 3 or 4 stories. They allow side-by-side homes. Sometimes they have a little gap between them, so they're not a shared wall like we would have done in a traditional urban environment in the old days. But because I could see people, hey, I can afford a 2,500 square foot lot, and I can go build a small home, and we can add on to it later. It's getting back to some of those principles that were fundamental when this country was young too. Sort of a DIY approach. We could get back to that because it's going to be maybe a few $100,000, but it's easier than buying a tear down at $800,000. So I hope that in the future, or maybe even in this comp plan, we can look at going below 5,000 square feet, going down to 2,500 square feet or something like that, and allowing that to happen in the RM zones or something like that. I don't think it'll be the end of the world, and I think only limited numbers of people will be taking us up on those. So until we begin to explode like a Houston or something like that, it's going to be pretty spread out. And that's another reason I like alternative 2 also, is that we heard a lot of people, like during the comment period, express a desire for, again, less concentration of growth downtown and more spread out. And the cool thing is about missing middle housing and alternative 2 is that it's a little bit all over. And I know that's not lost on you guys as planners, but it's sprinkled all over. And so, and I know we had studies to that effect. I think it was a year ago when the city was doing its outreach last spring, and they had a report that was really clear on that we would see, it'd be peppered all around the city instead of concentrated in one area, which people seem to have a problem with. So just want to make those comments, and that's why I really lean towards alternative 2. I just think it would be a more equitable and opportunity-filled way to fill out the city edge to edge, as it were. Thank you.
Other commissioner comments? Commissioner Gustafson?
Hi, Sarah Gustafson here. I have 2 questions. One is related to Commissioner Westerbeck's question, but I will start off with perhaps more broad picture one. It seems that alternative 2 and alternative 3 in the abstract would both result in the same amount of new housing in the spreadsheet exercise frame of mind that you referenced, and perhaps even would result in the same amount of target affordable housing in the spreadsheet exercise. So my question is, if we were going to put the spreadsheet there and focus on your gut feeling as planners, which alternative do you think might have the best chance of getting us more housing and more affordable housing?
I am going to go into a little more detail on housing in a minute. They do both have capacity. Alt 2 creates more extra capacity, so could provide more flexibility potentially in how the housing happens. Obviously, we can't, like, you have your adopted targets, and we can't say that growth will exactly happen that way. But they do both have capacity. They just meet it in different ways.
Thanks so much. Yes, I really appreciate the honesty and I really appreciate the detail as well. And my second question is related to Commissioner Westerbeck. I was also wondering something similar myself about the demographics and geographics of the people who seem to be supporting Alternative 2 versus Alternative 3. And my question is, have we asked the people specifically from the centers that would have additional growth under Alternative 3 how they would feel about it? Because my own personal feeling about the comments is that the people who live in places that would not be affected under Alternative 3 are mostly saying, let's go with Alternative 3. However, the one comment that I saw that I think is from one of those growth centers is saying, let's do Alternative 2. So my question is, what have we seen any demographic or geographic patterns there?
We didn't ask for people to provide that information in their comments, so I don't think we can speak to the kind of the formal comment letters that have come in. Canyon Park went through a relatively recent sub-area planning process, so the reality is that under either of these alternatives, it kind of is, they're in line with that sub-area plan still. Downtown is likely to go through a revised sub-area plan process soon. So that kind of, there'd be more specific outreach there during that process. We haven't reached out to downtown specifically, knowing that that is kind of coming. Red Barn, we have had the kind of more focused conversations there. Yeah, that's the.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think I'm seeing some patterns there. But one really interesting thing I did want to point out is that in the feedback we have from the Duwamish tribe, which might be considered, as Commissioner Robson said, one of the groups who traditionally not had the same voice in planning, actually recommended Alternative 3. And my understanding was that they might have felt that it might be easier to protect cultural sites because there might be more opportunity to do greater exploration in centralized areas. So that's something I would definitely think could give us some thought. Thank you.
Commissioner Robson?
Thank you. I just really wanted to echo some of my fellow commissioners' ideas here, particularly that in Alternative 3, there's more options, there's more housing options available to different kinds of families. And that's one of the reasons why it really appeals to me. Not everybody wants to live downtown, and sometimes those people cannot afford to live in a single family home. And so I really like the idea that with Alternative 3, we can do more housing options. And I think ultimately it will end up with more effective land use. I think, developers might, have more options of where they can build, their ideal project because they'll have a variety of space, but also it will sell better because lots of people will want lots of different things. If somebody's not able to afford, a single family home, but they have small children and don't want to live downtown, I'd love for everyone to have a place or lots of options for all kinds of families. And so that's one of the reasons why I think it's Alternative 2. Now I'm getting myself confused. But a more integrated approach to a variety of housing really appears to me as opposed to just remaining the high density downtown. And then my second question was, are we strictly just speaking about the overlay land use right now, or are we more expansive to the whole comprehensive plan for comments?
I just want to clarify, so the alternative 2 is the neighborhoods based approach, and
Yeah, I
alt
think
3
I
is the
got them
centers one. And so I think you were
flipped.
speaking to alt 2 in most of the comments. Okay,
Yeah, I apologize for that. I think I was getting them flipped.
that's okay.
But I approve of a more holistic, integrated approach as opposed to just a narrow, limited density approach within downtown. And then I have a few extra comments, but it's to the comprehensive plan overall. And probably right now we're just sticking to the land use for comments.
Yes, that's the section we're on right now, but there'll be
Yeah,
additional sections addressed.
yes, the other ones are coming.
Okay,
Okay,
so hold those comments. Commissioner Jones.
Thank you, Commissioner Jones speaking. I had a couple of questions, I think, more so. So one was, I'm not sure, are we at the point where you're going to talk about how, about the different environmental impacts related to alternatives 2 and 3? Because I appreciate everything that the other commissioners have said, and there's certainly some real benefits to the neighborhoods approach. I would like to better understand the impacts to traffic, the impacts to runoff, the impacts to potential resizing and of sewers and water lines and things like that. I would like to understand that, because I think there's some logic to the center's approach in terms of locating them along arterials and where there's already going to be increased capacity to move people from various places. So one is, when are we going to hear about the different impacts? And then the second question is, I realize you can't look at multiple alternatives. You've already done an amazing job. These are very thorough. But what I think we're seeing is, one is a neighborhoods approach where there's increased density throughout the city. The other approach is the centers approach, where we already have some defined centers and we're just looking at increasing housing in those defined centers. Did we look at creating another center where we could increase growth in that area as opposed to spreading it throughout the city? I'm not sure if I'm making myself clear there, but hopefully that makes sense.
I think so. I'm going to speak to the center one first. So Red Barn is kind of that transitional center where it's not at the same density levels as Canyon Park downtown, or even like North Creek with jobs. So that is kind of the other center that we were focusing on here, because it makes sense along for geographically where it's located related to the other centers. Also where, it's on Bothell Highway, so you've got the kind of increased transit and investments that are being made there. Ultimately, the city doesn't have to go with alt 2 or alt 3 as written. You can come up, the kind of final preferred alternative can be a blend of these. So just to help you understand that it doesn't have to be exactly what's written here. You're not making an A or B choice necessarily. You can kind of pick and choose some pieces of both of these, as long as ultimately you're still meeting the targets, the capacity targets, and kind of making other updates to the plan consistent with the new GMA requirements. Did you want to jump in there? Sorry.
Well, I was going to jump in and say, and the final choice and perhaps even the melding of alternatives will occur after the environmental review.
Yes, and the environmental impact statement was released at the same time as the draft plan, so we have kind of looked at the environmental impacts of the two alternatives. In terms of a lot of the impacts are very similar under both of the alternatives, because it's kind of a cumulative look citywide for things. So when you're talking about like increased runoff for the natural environment, you're gonna kind of that would increase with growth and development, or it would change, and so it's they both would have impacts to that then the city's existing kind of regulations plans would come into place to help mitigate those. The kind of biggest differences would be just that visually development would look a little bit different in the residential areas under the alternatives. I believe the traffic impacts were pretty similar under the two alternatives. Again, we can't speak to like a specific development happening on a specific parcel, so it's kind of this more system-wide look at how the different streets would be impacted, not just by kind of so streets and blanking on what I'm trying to say, bike lanes, things like pedestrian paths. So it's not just thinking about the impacts to car trips necessarily. So that. Go ahead.
Oh, no, that's, I understand that you have to look at impacts on the aggregate because you're not looking at a specific project. So that makes a whole lot of sense. However, you probably have an idea of which subpopulations are facing more impacts than others under the two alternatives. And so are there differences? So for example, are there more impacts for some of our lower socioeconomic groups, or are certain racial groups affected more by one alternative versus the other alternative, and for which environmental impacts? Because there have to be differences, right? If you're going to increase development in a few centers versus spreading it out across the city. It just naturally, even if we just think about traffic, there has to be a difference in that, right?
So because there is kind of under both alternatives, there is some growth kind of spread throughout the city because of the middle housing and revisions. So you're gonna see some growth everywhere kind of under both of them, which is part of why the impacts end up being fairly similar. The increases in the increased density in the centers is more under alt 3, but it is still kind of not a drastic change from what you have now in most situations. There's a kind of executive summary of impacts from the environmental impact statement. I think they're attached to this packet, but they're also online, and it kind of goes through the likely impacts and mitigation for those impacts. We did look at displacement as part of that, so that's in the kind of housing section of the EIS. Does that help?
It definitely helps. I mean, my overall question was really, are we going to have a presentation where someone like you is able to walk us through those impacts? Because your presentation has been excellent and really helped me a lot more than me reading. You know, I've read all the sections that you've talked about today, but your presentation really helped us. And I think to speak to the comments, for example, that Commissioner Robson said, even your slides are just a different way of looking at the material that really has helped us. And even your slides would be very useful for us moving forward. So I'm curious as to will this group get a presentation on the environmental impacts and the main differences between the two alternatives? So that was really my original question. But what I'm hearing you say, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that the alternatives 2 and 3 essentially have the same impacts. I mean, there's slight differences, but essentially the same impacts, except for the visual appearance, the aesthetic appearance. I think that's what I heard you say, and that's an important piece of information.
So I'd need to read back exactly what I have in the summary before I say 100% yes to that. But in general, the impacts are pretty similar. I would need to look back at the specifics to know if it's just the visual piece of that is different between the two. I don't believe there's a presentation scheduled to walk through those kind of impacts. But it's not, please correct me if I'm wrong, Jason or Christian, I don't think it's like off the table to walk through those with you guys. The summary hopefully helps kind of lay those out, but I'm hearing that talking through them in more detail would be helpful.
Thank you very much. I don't want to speak for everyone else. Certainly, I really appreciated your presentation today, and it would be useful for me. But I'm not the only person, so I totally understand that.
Commissioner Lever?
Yes, I definitely want to second that, and I think it's almost sort of like a request around the demographic component and maybe other indicators to really help me understand, like in Bothell right now, I'm thinking like a heat map, but kind of just really looking at where are the different like racial demographics, any like pockets that we may have, and then how would these changes will overlay with those layers of information from the census perhaps, and maybe you can direct me to where I can go to just better understand the makeup of the city and really understanding who's getting impacted, and perhaps that will really help me even get a better sense of who was underrepresented within the engagement component, knowing that it wasn't tracked, and I totally get it, and engagement is super difficult, but really getting a sense of who was not at the table, and then really even understanding from the steering committee, how did we really reach out to the different groups that are part of our city and may be impacted, and whether it's going to be negative or positive, it is really going to be up to them to let us know that down the road. So if perhaps maybe A, you can tell me if there's any demographic information that I could already access, and then B, I would really definitely second like to see the impact at a demographic level, just to really make sure that I'm understanding the equity component of the plan.
Yeah, so the kind of existing demographics are detailed in Appendix B of the comp plan, which is kind of this land use and housing technical appendix, and a lot of the details in there. There's a little bit of it in the housing element, but a lot of it is in that appendix there. There's kind of a community profile. It does go through the racial demographics. It goes through age and the distribution of race in the city. So a lot of that is in there. The land use section of the EIS also looks at environmental justice. So we do look at kind of components like noise and environmental health. I can't think of the word, I'm sorry, but we considered kind of where environmental and where like risks to health and are greatest in the city. The displacement risk analysis also looks at, which is kind of in that Appendix B as well. There's a map that I want to point you to that I will pull up so that I can. So it's in section B2, so it's Appendix B, and there's a displacement risk and racially disparate impacts analysis in there. So kind of looking at socioeconomic vulnerability, where we think displacement risk is higher. The EIS also actually within each section considers kind of equity and climate related impacts of the alternatives. So that is specifically called out in relation to each of the sections. So not just land use, but it's also in like transportation, utilities, it's in the environment sections. So I know I've pointed you to a couple different places, but. Mm-hmm.
Other commissioner questions, comments? So regarding the two alternatives, I'd kind of like to echo some of what Commissioner Westerbeck said in favoring alternative 2. I think alternative 3 runs the risk of, well, let me phrase it differently. I think alternative 2 kind of gets more diversity into the neighborhoods. And there's a real risk of having there be the other. And we've heard comments about renters more than once. And if we're concentrating that growth in one area, I think it really runs the risk of exacerbating that attitude. Whereas if we distribute these units, they're part of the neighborhoods. And I think that's a benefit. So. Anything else on this section? No?
One last comment, very brief. Commissioner Westerbeck here. I just want to say my very first thought a month ago or so when I started digging into this was, I want the best of both 2 and 3. So I was really glad to hear you that it's going to be this blended idea, but we're sort of using them as a study mechanism, if it sounds like. So anyway, that was great to hear, because I feel like alternative 3 is sort of on autopilot. We're going to get the downtown growth, and obviously we're going to crack open the downtown sub-area plan and things like that. So that's going to happen anyway. We don't necessarily need to push it, but we do need to sort of facilitate the alternative 2 ideas that Chair Kiernan mentioned and others have talked about. That, and of course, HB 1110 and the middle housing stuff is going to facilitate also. So anyway, glad to hear that. And the only other thing I'd bring up is we've got this great report. It's probably gathering some dust now, but Urban 3 did a study of Bothell. I still think it's a very important report, and I would encourage the new planners to pull it out of the files, because they do, I don't know if you know about Urban 3, they do sort of fiscal analysis of land use, and it had some really good information in there that very much applies to our comp plan process and future planning. Hopefully we'll break it out for the downtown plan also, but like tracking productive and unproductive land use. But the thing I wanted to get to that is they very much emphasize, they do this everywhere they go, the idea of nodes that has been brought up tonight. Canyon Park is kind of a big node, and we did that plan a few years ago. But there are going to be multiple places around the city, especially, long after we're gone. These nodes are going to naturally pop up, just like do in the city of Seattle and Spokane and every other city in the world. There's going to be these little, business districts that develop. So what are those going to be for Bothell that aren't there now? And those will be like miniature alternative 3s. So hopefully we're thinking about that as well, and that's part of that blended idea. So I just wanted to bring that up because I think those are going to happen naturally. So if we get out in front of them and start thinking about where they're going to be early, then we can guide that growth a little bit. Thanks.
Okay, I think that's that section. What's your plan moving forward? And where I'm going is, should we take a break? Getting close to 2 hours here.
I was going to cover housing, which is actually pretty similar to kind of the discussion we've already been having already. Just giving you a little bit more context on the numbers. And so maybe we can, it's 4 slides, so it's far fewer slides. Maybe we can run through that and then take a break.
Okay, certainly.
Okay. So you've got the targets you have to plan to citywide. Most of that need, as has been mentioned, is really at that kind of 80% or less of area median income. We've kind of heard and identified several housing related opportunities and challenges in our efforts this far. Proposed updates to the plan build on the efforts the city's already undertaken to increase housing supply and diversity, with more middle housing, ADUs, and then to support the affordability goals and emphasize opportunities for kind of emergency and permanent supportive housing. Some of the likely challenges are not necessarily unique to Bothell, but kind of more of the regional challenges with minimizing involuntary displacement in Bothell, specifically balancing housing needs and redevelopment with the environmental considerations. Bothell has more of those than other communities in the area. And then kind of housing accessible to students and staff at UW, Bothell, and Cascadia College. So the revised goals and policies really focus on supporting the variety in the housing element, focus on supporting a variety of housing types, quality affordable housing, housing that's accessible for multiple groups, so seniors, vulnerable populations, people with disabilities, other marginalized groups, and then also kind of consistent coordination with the regional groups to address more regional and city housing needs. Sorry, this is slightly different than what I had before. So I think I already went through that. So when we were looking at our kind of capacity considerations, different housing types are more suitable for meeting housing at different income levels, kind of due in part to significant differences in land use and construction costs per unit. But our capacity analysis under the 3 land use alternatives mapped these kind of 4 general categories of residential development to the lowest possible income levels they would serve. So looking at low rise and mid rise, moderate density, low density, and ADUs. The categories and affordability assumptions are kind of consistent with commerce guidance for updating housing elements, as well as our kind of local understanding of housing market conditions in Bothell. So the market rate apartments and condos, the low and mid-rise buildings, generally affordable for households between 80 to 120% of area median income, but they can be affordable for households at the lowest income ranges when there are subsidies involved as well. The moderate density or kind of more middle housing types are typically affordable for those at 80% of area median income or above. Whereas detached single-family housing is typically affordable for households above 120% of area median income. And then the ADUs are kind of affordable for, in the capacity analysis, we consider them affordable for households earning between 50 and 120% of area median income. And then this table summarizes the calculated total housing capacity by county and citywide under each of the alternatives. The action alternatives provide enough capacity to meet the adopted housing targets overall and in each county. I know I mentioned Alt 2 results in more extra capacity. I just want to also note that under Alt 1, your no action, the counties completed buildable lands reports in 2021, and they had capacity numbers as part of that. They don't use quite the same methodology as one another. So in part of our analysis, we went through and tried to reconcile those into one citywide look, which is why we have a calculated capacity number. But we modeled the growth kind of consistent with the caps in the buildable lands and the plans for Canyon Park and downtown. So, and again, the modeled growth under Alt 2 and 3 are capped at what those targets are. So that's why you see the modeled growth is much lower than what the calculated capacity would be for those. All alternatives have capacity to meet housing targets at all income levels in King County, with the most surplus under Alt 2, but only the action alternatives have capacity to meet housing targets at all income levels in Snohomish County especially. The no action alternative doesn't have enough capacity at the lowest or highest income levels, whereas Alt 2 has the surplus capacity at the lowest income levels, and Alt 3 has some surplus capacity at kind of the middle range income levels. And then another kind of caveat to this is that some early feedback with PSRC, they've suggested we revise these calculations so that ADUs only serve 80 to 120 instead of also 50 to 80% of area median income, because Bothell is a high cost community. So with those assumptions, Alt 2 would still have capacity at all the income levels. It would just have slightly smaller surplus at the lowest income levels. And then Alt 3 would not have enough capacity without some changes at the lowest income levels in Snohomish County. So that's kind of all I had on housing, which is why I thought we could cover it now. If there are any specific questions on that, we can address them, but otherwise I think we'll
I see Commissioner Sills.
Yeah, I just wanted to share that it was referenced earlier, but I found Appendix B incredibly helpful for understanding both the land use and housing sections, kind of going more in depth as we talked about. So particularly the gap analysis section, and then also pages 78 and 79, I believe, in that comprehensive plan, which really were revealing to me along the lines of what you're saying in the slide, that, you know, particularly for Snohomish County to reach enough housing, especially middle housing and some of the lower AMI, really it comes through that alternative two has a lot more potential. So I just wanted to share my takeaways there, and I'm glad that they kind of match up with what it sounds like you're saying here.
Other commissioners? Looking around the table and at the screen, I don't see any other comments. So I guess that finishes your portion here. I'm going to suggest we take a 10-minute break. So I'm going to say 7:55, come back at 8:05. All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, I think we're about ready to reconvene. So we'll bring the June 5th meeting of the Bothell Planning Commission back to order, and we will continue our study session on the 2024 Imagine Bothell Comprehensive Plan. And we have some new presenters. Would you like to introduce yourselves and launch in?
Hello, my name is Jacqueline Sampson. I am a long-range planner here at the City of Bothell. And I guess I'll just start off with the different elements of the comprehensive plan and continue where Jesse left off. So for starters, I'm going to talk about human services. The City of Bothell defines human services as programs and services to help community members have equitable access to meet their basic physical, economic, and social needs. So areas of assistance can include like housing and shelter, food and security, mental health services, legal support and shelter for victims of domestic violence, education and childcare, and programs for older adults, just to name a few. Future needs. So as Bothell's population becomes more diverse, the demand for a variety of human services has increased. This includes culturally competent support as well as translation services. To address this, the city is developing a human services strategic plan and needs assessment. This plan will use data to identify service gaps, set priorities, and provide actionable recommendations for the next 3 years. Currently, Bothell contracts with 25 to 30 nonprofit and community-based organizations to meet these different needs. The strategic plan aims to unify these providers and under a shared vision for improved community support. And the draft human service goal that's within the comprehensive plan is a healthy, stable, and productive community in which all community members have equitable access and ability to meet their basic physical, economic, and social needs and the opportunity to thrive. Next, I'll be talking about economic development. So economic development provides policy direction for maintaining, expanding, and attracting economic activity across the city. Major themes incorporated into economic development based on ongoing engagement with community, analysis of available economic data, staff, and stakeholders include diverse economy, so promoting a strong, diverse economy with local employment and entrepreneurship opportunities that support the natural and cultural environment. Support for residents, enhancing local economic opportunities through job training, employment, and entrepreneurship, including culturally diverse businesses. Focusing on centers, concentrating economic development in targeted centers, supporting local and regional employment with mixed-use areas for resident and visitors. Neighborhood retail access, developing smaller scale retail and services in neighborhoods to support residences and encourage walkability and build social connections. High quality of life, so attracting businesses that enhance quality of life and foster interdependencies with local activities. supportive infrastructure, ensuring safe, accessible, and efficient transportation systems to facilitate movement within Bothell and the region. Partnerships, encouraging collaboration with various organizations, businesses, and consumers to address local economic challenges efficiently, and fiscal sustainability. So maintaining effective and efficient services for residents and support local economic activity through sustainable and municipal revenues. There's different economic goals. They're more detailed in the comprehensive plan, but in summary, the economic goals create a strong, diverse, and sustainable local economy through strategic planning that enhances the quality of life and respects the environment. Emphasize fostering partnerships and a supportive business environment to provide economic opportunities, local employment, and entrepreneurship, especially in tourism and living wage jobs. And focus on ensuring a broad range of employment options and developing a skilled local workforce to meet business needs. Urban design looks at how residential and commercial uses interact with public facilities, services, open spaces, and the natural environment. There are different opportunities and challenges as a city continues to grow. This includes transit partnerships, so collaborating with community transit and sound transit on future route expansions, high-density housing, promoting high density around community transit, swift green line improvements, and future transit routes to enhance access to social and economic opportunities, small business support, focusing on technical assistance, especially for those that are women and BIPOC owned, in order to address economic displacement, home ownership, creating opportunities for first-time homeowners with affordable housing near jobs, reducing displacement, and supporting climate resiliency, walkable neighborhoods, encouraging land use that supports walking and biking, and future growth will shape job access and social and economic hubs, focusing on human skill development that continues residents' lifestyle and respects Bothell's diverse communities. And those design goals summarized are up there. Focus on creating a high-quality, sustainable mix of built, natural, and cultural environments, fostering community pride with inviting public spaces and encouraging pedestrian, bicycle, and transit use, as well as emphasizing high-quality human-scale development that integrates residential, commercial, and industrial areas and coordinates with private and community partners for overall community benefit. And then cultural and historical preservation. Preserving Bothell's cultural heritage helps conserve resources, maintain existing buildings, and enhance climate resiliency while celebrating the city's diverse communities. A couple of different opportunities and challenges as the city will grow include that while growth in Bothell may disturb or destroy undocumented archaeological resources, especially along the Sammamish River and North Creek, construction could also demolish or alter historic properties and their settings. And climate change may cause flooding, landslides, erosion, and threatening cultural historic sites. Culturally important temperative sensitive foods like berries and salmon may be lost within climate change, as well as many historic resources near the Sammamish River, downtown North Creek, and Horse Creek could also be affected. So these are all different challenges that are really important to keep in mind. The Telling Bothell's Full Story project also aimed to include the diverse histories of Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, while the new climate change resiliency element identifies strategies to protect cultural resources from climate change. And those cultural and historic resources goals summarized are identify, preserve, celebrate, and ensure diverse cultural resources, contribute to Bothell's sense of pride, civic pride, and neighborhood identity, while resolving conflicts with development at an early age. And now I'm going to pass it on to Emily.
Are we stopping for questions, or should I continue on?
Let's pause for a minute. Any questions or comments? No? Good.
Alrighty.
Proceed.
Then with that, my name is Emily Nielsen, and I'm the Climate Action Fellow with the City of Bothell. So I'll be going over the natural environment element first. This element guides the stewardship of our natural resources within the city, and there are a lot of much more in-depth goals in your packet, but to go over the highlights, protecting and enhancing critical areas through regulations based on best available science, cultivate harmony between natural and built environments, boosting resiliency to climate impacts, and enhancing habitat quality and connectivity. We'll go on to the next slide, which is the climate element. And this is the first time that a climate element has been included within Bothell's comprehensive plan, being consistent with new legislation HB 1181, which requires all cities in Washington state to carry out some sort of climate element. With that, Bothell will be responding to climate impacts, including extreme heat, wildfire smoke, extreme precipitation, flooding, stream low flow due to decreased snowpack, drought, and low soil moisture. And the climate goals summarized, there are three main frameworks that guide the goals and policies, and included those three frameworks are mitigate, meaning reducing the greenhouse gas emissions and vehicle miles traveled within the city, building resilience to these climate impacts, so promoting the health of the public, the environment, and the economy, as well as a relatively newly added framework, which is engage. Throughout these processes, making sure that we are empowering community action and stewardship while we are addressing the climate crisis. And I'll pass it on.
Thanks, Emily. My name's Cameron Colvin, long-range planner with the City of Bothell. So I'll be taking us through the last four elements in the comprehensive plan. A lot of these elements are tied to their own individual plans or integrated with our capital facilities plan. So I'll kind of reference you all to those plans or the appendices for specific details about proposed projects or priorities that are identified in those. So in terms of parks, recreation, and open space, this works in tandem with our PROS plan, which was last updated in 2020 and will be updated again in 2026. Our existing parks consist of over 400 acres of city-owned parklands. The adopted level of service from the 2020 plan includes 3.2 acres of core city parkland per every 1,000 Bothell residents. And then the capital facilities plan identifies those target acquisition areas or proposed park improvements. A couple of opportunities or challenges that were identified in the plan are gaps in service areas, increased demand from increasing population and use, system expansion, accessible playgrounds, climate change impacts, and then funding. Next slide. So a lot of the goals and policies as part of the comprehensive plan update were mainly focused on building consistency between the last PROS update. And then these will be revisited after the Parks and Recreation and Open Space Plan is updated again in 2026. So in general, it emphasizes the need to continue our high level of service with our existing park systems and programs while meeting future needs for growth. In terms of funding, updating the plan in 2026 will help us remain eligible for state grant funding. And we'll also continue to utilize our park growth impact fee program to generate funding for future acquisition and improvements. Couple other highlights are really prioritizing increased recreational programming has been a big focus, prioritizing inclusive and accessible parks and play equipment, and then also increasing resiliency to address potential impacts from climate change. Next slide. Okay, moving on to transportation. This element kind of guides decisions on how to improve mobility and access throughout Bothell. And we do have a transportation improvement project list that kind of prioritizes specific transportation improvements and funding. So a couple of opportunities or challenges that were identified were a limited number of through arterials, mostly due to development patterns and environmental constraints, which leads to congestion along our major corridors. Limited pedestrian and bicycle access between our different sub-areas throughout the city. First mile and last mile connections have been challenging just because of the diverse transit providers and network. Couple of opportunities that were identified were adopting a multimodal level of service, which I'll expand upon on the next slide. The city did recently complete a citywide bike plan and sidewalk prioritization, which has helped kind of identify those areas where bike ped improvements will take place. Couple other opportunities were expanding local fixed route, microtransit, and high capacity transit, expanding regional I-405 express toll lanes and access points, emerging technologies such as electric vehicles, and then looking at potentially expanding our transportation demand management programs, such as the ones in Canyon Park, to other areas of the city to help cut down on vehicle congestion and traffic. Next slide. Okay, so the goals and policies kind of summarize our transportation plan envisions a well-connected, resilient, efficient, and financially sustainable transportation system that provides safe multimodal travel options for all people of all abilities. There is some overlap between our transportation element and our land use element. Some of the modeling and kind of land use growth projections feed into one another back and forth. So one of the main kind of things we'll be tackling in our transportation division and consultant will be tackling is updating those assumptions after we have a preferred alternative to move forward with. So two key things that are new with this update are moving to a multimodal level of service. So our current level of service system is kind of corridor focusing on vehicle delays, while moving to a multimodal approach focuses on entire trips. So not just vehicles, but biking, pedestrian, other modes of travel. Kind of along those same lines, we are shifting from our transportation concurrency, which measures how well we are building transportation capacity to keep pace with growth. So as part of this, we'll be shifting away from that corridor-based level of service standard to a system completeness approach, which will more so focus on our 20-year transportation project list and the implementation of that and how well that's keeping pace with growth and demand. And we do have Steve Morikawa with our Public Works and Transportation Division to help answer any questions y'all may have at the end related to transportation. Next slide. Okay, our capital facilities element is predominantly tied to our capital facility plans. This ensures adequate facilities are available to serve existing and future development in the city in an efficient, effective, and equitable manner. So we're in the process of our 7-year update to that, which will cover 2025 to 2031. And there's a budgeting process and kind of prioritization associated with that that's underway. So the full cost and revenue analysis within this element will be updated based on the results of that, as well as the preferred land use alternative that we move forward with. So to summarize the goals from this element, goals and policies support high levels of service, sound fiscal management of and proactive planning of capital facilities in coordination and collaboration with non-city providers and neighboring jurisdictions. Next slide. Okay, last up is utilities. So Bothell aims to provide reliable, affordable utility services by coordinating with private and regional entities to meet demand, replacing our aging infrastructure, ensuring equitable access, and prioritizing sustainability and climate preparedness. Some of the challenges and opportunities within this element that were identified focused on aging infrastructure, capacity limitations, innovation and technology to help reduce demand, climate change impacts, and then equity and affordability. So there's kind of 4 overarching areas of the goals and policies within our draft plan. These focus on developing and improving utilities to meet appropriate levels of service for existing and future growth, ensuring safe, reliable, and quality utility services at reasonable and equitable rates throughout the city, minimizing impacts of utility facilities on adjacent land uses and the environment, and promoting energy conservation. And with that, that'll kind of wrap up our element summary. So if y'all have any specific questions on those or the materials in your packet, we can field those now.
So, commissioners, questions? Commissioner Gustafson?
Hi, Sarah Gustafson here. I did have some questions about the transportation element in regards to the draft transportation element that was posted. And I'm wondering, would now be a good time to get into those questions? Are we going to take a more detailed line-by-line look at the goals and policies and the elements?
I think if we dive into, we can field transportation questions now.
Okay, great. Yeah. So when I read the transportation element of the comprehensive plan, I was very excited about the first goal, which is the safety goal. And I found that there was some really strong Vision Zero language there. And there was reducing to zero collisions and serious fatalities or accidents by 2035. And I love that we put a year in there, which is great. So as I'm going through, I do still want to keep a focus on the balance between the multimodal level of service standard, which we're moving towards, and the vehicle throughput standard, which was the old way that we're trying to move away from. And I still feel like the vehicle throughput standard is very, very specific about the goal, and the multimodal level of service standard is still very vague. And I am seeing that the vehicle throughput standard is still aiming for a level of service E, even on the roads that are not required by the Growth Management Act. And I'm wondering, why are we prioritizing level of service E? My understanding, and I could be mistaken, is that we don't need to necessarily meet that standard of level of service E for the local corridors, which would then release more resources for all the other transportation projects that we want to do. So my question is, do we need this much specificity about vehicle throughput standards, and can we put that aside?
Yeah, Steve, I'll defer to you.
Let me think a little. So I think what's happening right now is the transportation element is in a kind of a draft form, kind of like our draft EIS, and it's not in the preferred form yet. And one of the things that you don't see is a complete list of projects. What you do see is actually the list of projects that were there from the 2015, as well as the Canyon Park and the downtown plans. So we didn't add any capacity projects. And our first run at making sure that we have at least an acceptable vehicle system was to see if those projects were capable of carrying our capacity out. Now, remember, in 2015, our target year was 2035. It's now another 10 years out. And we were able to show that by employing things like TSMO, TDM, unfortunately, but the effect of COVID and telecommuting, those things kind of added up, and it kind of allowed us to not add any more vehicle capacity projects. Now, the level of service is really a measurement, and it's just one way of ensuring that we actually have the capacity to have some level of acceptable flow. Level of service E is definitely not very high. It goes from A to F, and we're at E. And what basically E means is anytime you get any interruption of flow, like if there's one car that there's an accident, everything breaks down. Level of service F means you're essentially going to get congestion at that particular intersection all the time during peak hours, typically PM, but oftentimes AM. What we do, though, is we don't look at all our local streets. We don't check all our local intersections. We pretty much stick to the primary and minor arterials. And those are our concurrency corridors in the past. We're keeping that as a way to measure how well traffic is flowing. And level of service can be done various ways. One way is every single intersection on that corridor has to pass level of service E. We don't do that. We take a pretty long corridor. As an example, one of our longest corridors is Bothell Way, Bothell Highway, State Route 527. And that has multiple intersections all the way from right down here all the way up to 524. And we average it out. So what's actually happening on that corridor is closer to the downtown area where we've had new projects, we have good level of service. But up by Canyon Park, we have very poor level of service. In fact, a couple of intersections are approaching F. There will be definitely level of service E. But we average it out. So what we're basically saying is if you drive a car from 524 to 522, on average, you will experience a level of service E, which is barely above congestion. So it gives us a lot of flexibility. And what we feel is that's probably the minimal acceptable level to allow traffic to go through our primary and minor arterials. Recognizing that if we have congestion everywhere, it's not just time in people, it's also frustration, it's also starts generating safety issues as well. So that's where we think there's going to be a balance. So what the multimodal will do is we're saying what minimum do we have to do to meet that minimum level of service for vehicles? Once we have that project list, we're going to add to that project list safety projects, resiliency projects, pedestrian projects, bike projects. And that whole list will be what we measure our performance on. In other words, if we have 50 projects of various types, multimodal projects, we need to get through that 50 projects in order to meet our 20-year concurrency. And that's how we're going to measure it.
This is really great information. Let me know if I'm getting a little too far into the weeds on this and if it would be better for another discussion, because I do have some follow-up questions. Let me know what you would think, Chair Kiernan. Okay, great, thank you. So I understand we're trying to balance a lot of different priorities here. And I think there are a lot of logical goals of why the city would want to prioritize at least a level E at, say, the 10 intersections described in the transportation element. But my question here, just pushing a little harder, is does the Growth Management Act say that we need to keep those at level E? Or if we wanted to, just thinking through this as a city, could we say, yes, we are okay with those dropping to level F because we want to try something different? So are we legally obligated to keep those at level E, in other words?
I think if you can justify it as an example, I believe there are regions throughout Puget Sound where there's no way they're going to make any particular intersection meet level of service E or even a corridor. And those are typically the very heavy urban areas. They make exemptions, and they specifically write into the plan that something to the effect of, I'm going to take Canyon Park as a thought. So picture Canyon Park 20 years from now, it's much more built out. There's a lot of more people there. And the intersections are failing because essentially that's what we modeled in the last plan. Several of those intersections failed in the Canyon Park plan, but they averaged out. So what we're essentially saying, and we actually are currently saying now, is we're accepting that level of performance on 527 because we feel that's the best we can do. And we still need growth in the Canyon Park. It's not going to get any better if we put growth anywhere else. But at the same time, we also get a lot of people concerned about getting through there, as well as the business park themselves, because it's not just, single occupancy vehicle cars. We have to get transit through, we have to get freight through, because we have labs there and they have material being delivered and everything. So we can make exceptions, and I think we actually used our corridor average to make that exception in this case for the Canyon Park area, because we couldn't make every single intersection work at level of service E.
Okay, thank you. Sarah Gustafson here. Chair Kiernan, is it all right to make a statement, or should we move forward?
I don't see any other commissioners raising their hands at the moment, so proceed.
Yes. So given what Transportation Director Morikawa has said, it does sound like we are not legally required to use, to stick with level E. I am not saying that we should aim for level F, but what I am saying is that when we look at the list of transportation projects, we should not put the projects that keep us at level E prioritized above every single other project. We should look at them in an integrated way and score them in an integrated way so that we give a chance for, if we decide that safety is more important than vehicle throughput in a certain area, we do have the flexibility to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Other commissioners? Comments, questions? All right, I guess seeing none, can move to.
Yeah, so with that, I'll pass it back over to Christian. He's going to kind of wrap us up here and talk about next steps, upcoming meetings, and kind of schedule of how we move forward.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Okay. So all of this that we did here tonight was to prep the commission for the next month and a half or so. What you see up here is a tentative timeline for some upcoming meetings. Obviously, we have the public hearing before you on the 26th. Our tentative idea is that given the amount of time that we want to allow for the final draft to be prepared based on your recommendation to council, then council's direction to us would be to come back following the public hearing to the commission on July 3rd to go through the exercise of findings, recommendations, and conclusions. As Chair Kiernan mentioned at the beginning, on the frontage improvements, it's your presentation. You're speaking directly to the council as far as what your guidance is. Staff can work to, and Jason or Jesse help me out here, but we can work to prepare the draft materials, which would be a bit of a scramble following the public hearing, but would do that in order to achieve the timeline here with the input that we've heard from you tonight, the input that we hear from you and the community on the 26th, up to the 26th, and then go through the exercise on the 3rd to specifically focus on finalizing that recommendation, then therefore taking that recommendation to City Council on July 9th, then allowing them the opportunity to come back on the 16th to provide the final direction at this stage, so the department can work to wrap up through August and into September, where we then come back to commission and council for what the final draft would look like, so we can achieve the end of the year deadline. Anything you want to add, Jason?
No, I think that really summarizes next steps, and the time that's needed to complete the technical modeling work and the land use distribution is really essential following the 16th at the city council. So that's kind of why we're on this more aggressive schedule now. We need that time to be able to go back to the drawing board with the direction from city council and planning commission, develop the project list, do the final transportation modeling, land use assumptions, and have that final preferred alternative. It takes some time to do that, and we want space to talk this through in the fall once we get to that final preferred.
Yeah, so if there are any other items to clarify, to discuss that we went through tonight, we want to make sure that the heads on your shoulders are full and ready and prepped for this timeline.
So correct me if need be, but the meeting on the 3rd will be a very important one, where we will have, as has been said before, the opportunity to speak directly to council and the findings. I believe you're going to try to get those to us on Friday the 28th?
Correct. We would aim to have them posted to you in obviously draft form.
Sure.
That we would work through on the 3rd.
Yeah, and recognizing that's a really short turnaround from whatever you hear on the 26th. So
right.
We acknowledge that. So I guess for the commissioners, just kind of bookmark that. The 3rd, it is the day before the holiday. It may not be everyone's preference, but it is a big one. And that weekend before, you'll be getting a very important document to take a look at. So do think about that. That's about all I had to say on that one. Any comments or questions? And for any who can't make that meeting, and I understand there may be one or two, please do get your comments in, submit them to staff. Don't submit them to any of the commissioners because of Open Public Meetings Act issues, but submit them to staff and they will share them with us. Anything else?
That was it from us. It
All
looks
right.
like Commissioner Jones.
Oh, yes, Commissioner Jones.
Commissioner Jones, I appreciate the timeline and the deadlines, and I realize that there's probably nothing that can be done, but I just want to reiterate that I am uncomfortable not having a discussion about the environmental impacts or making recommendations.
We're having a little difficulty hearing you. Your audio is a little garbled.
Sorry, let's try. I'll try it without video. Is this better? Is this better?
Yeah, a little bit better, yes.
So I'm just restating that I'm uncomfortable making recommendations without a more substantive discussion about the environmental impact, the draft environmental impact statement. I think it is important to go through each of those. For those of you who've read the summary, I do think there are differences between the alternatives, and I do think it's important to have that discussion. I realize that I'm saying this and there's no way to probably change the schedule, but I did feel that I needed to know.
All right. Thank you. Suppose we could consider adding language to the findings about that. So do think about that when you read the findings. Other commissioners? Commissioner Gustafson?
Sarah Gustafson here. I did want to make sure we leave enough space to work with Commissioner Jones' concern, and I don't quite know how to do that, but I do feel like we as a commission could make some kind of motion recommending the delay, and I'm not saying we should do a delay, but at least debate the pros and cons of it, because this is something that's very important, especially as Commissioner Lever has said, to think through at least the potential impacts.
Chairman, may I just offer a suggestion?
Yes, please.
We can provide specific reference to the EIS summary that has been prepared, which does draw some of those distinctions and makes it clear what those are in terms of impacts, and also draw the Planning Commission's attention to the particular portion of the EIS document that speaks to those distinctions and the impacts of each alternative between now and the 26th. We could carve out some time on the 26th itself to have that discussion as well. It's a little unknown how much time a public hearing will take. It could be half an hour, it could be 4 hours. It's just hard to know, but that could be an option. And I know the EIS is a very large document, so we can help you hone in on what section to really focus your attention on to help understand those distinctions on impacts.
So thank you for that proposal, Director Greenspan. I am hearing from commissioners some real interest in going in that direction. So if you could help us a little more with that, that'd be great. And would you also speak a little bit to how the remainder of the environmental review process goes, and in particular how it then fits with the selection of alternative, with the potential of melding the alternatives?
Sure, we can provide clarity on that final EIS document itself, sure.
Commissioner Lever.
Yeah, I just want to sort of add, like, even in terms of like not even going back, but really thinking forward, when I think about our equity commitments and then engagement and how difficult it is to engage underrepresented populations or marginalized populations, I'm really interested in thinking of how we can almost use lessons learned as a way of thinking forward. Because at the end of the day, I think about all the commitments that we have around equity, and this is the opportunity to really do that work. I did take a look at Appendix B. Thank you so much. That was super helpful. And then again, I just think about ways of leveraging technology that can allow us to overlay maps down the road, right? When we look at the next scenario, when I think about the underrepresented populations and looking at who was engaged, again, there's so much information, and sometimes just like pinning us to that document, and then we can do the review of the documents. But then almost kind of going back to those agencies, right? And or really making sure that we really did hit the points that they brought up, because oftentimes we get the feedback, then we think we interpret the feedback, and then we get lost in translation. So I am totally open to sort of like moving forward, but really using this time to think about how we can continue to improve the process, knowing that the world has really changed and we are in a very polarized environment, and I am very hyper aware of the way in which this is going to be received by the community in the current context. And I just want to make sure that we don't just say, oh, it was great, we had great participation, but more so when I think about 100 and I think about the total population of Bothell, someone may say, great according to who? So I just really want to be really aware of the audience that we have, and just maybe make a statements of the facts, and then really start thinking of what would like to see moving forward, and then how do we do this collectively, knowing that this is going to be an ongoing process. And that's sort of my comment. So just being more forthcoming on the areas that we still have opportunity to improve.
Thank you. Other commissioner comments? I think then that ends the study session on the plan, recognizing that we have a whole lot more work to do on it in a short period of time. But with that, I think we'll move on to our next item, which is reports from members. Any members have anything you'd like to bring to the attention of the rest of the commissioners? Looking around the table. Seeing none. Reports from staff. Staff have anything else to bring to us this evening?
Nothing from staff at this time.
All right, thank you. So we should all prepare ourselves for a pretty long meeting next time on the 26th for the public hearing. I do think there'll be some people speaking, and I think we'll have some questions as well. So let's look forward to that. But there being no further business, is there a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn planning commission meeting.
Commissioner Westerbeck moved to adjourn, second.
I second.
Commissioner
Commissioner
Lever,
Lever.
second. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
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 All right. With that, the June 5th meeting of the Planning Commission is adjourned at 8:50 p.m. Our next meeting will be June 26th. Note that this is not our typical schedule, which would have been on the third Wednesday in recognition of the Juneteenth holiday. So we'll see you all at the end of the month. Thank you.